Thank you so much for coming. Parents of admitted students, deposited students, we really appreciate your time today. My name is Richie Caines. I'm an admission counselor and the diversity recruitment and engagement coordinator here in Calvin's Office of Admission. And I want to say thank you again for coming. It is a work night. We really appreciate your time. So whether it's your first parent seminar or your third, we're very grateful that you're here. I personally am doing what's called Zoom Professional. I have my dress shirt on top and my sweatpants and slippers on the bottom, which is okay after 5 p.m. That is an acceptable look, the Zoom Professional look. But we've got quite a lineup for you today. You'll be hearing from people in the admissions office, as well as members of the Parents Council who can really help to answer some of your deep questions about Calvin University. And I want to also mention that if you do have any questions, you can include them in the Q&A. We will have a Q&A session at the end, which will be about 20 minutes to half an hour. So we are hoping to get to all of your questions at that time. But if not, I will also mention there will be another opportunity to ask these questions. July 20th, we're hosting another event as well. But without further ado, I will allow Sarah Visser and Melissa Rousseau to introduce themselves. They have some really great information and tips for y'all.
Great, thanks Richie, and welcome to all of you. Thanks for chiming in tonight. I like the professional Zoom comment. My 8-year-old just says, "You look fancy on top." So grateful that you're joining us on this evening. My name's Sarah Visser. I serve as Vice President for Student Life here at Calvin. And a succinct way of explaining what that means is that I have the privilege of working with everybody who is trying to foster learning in and amongst your students in a way that happens outside of the classroom. So it's everything from residence life to orientation, to the career center, to campus ministries, to health and counseling, even campus safety is part of what we oversee. Lots of great developmental kinds of things. And so tonight I'm going to share a little bit more with you about what you can anticipate as you're thinking about helping your student adjust to life at Calvin. Before I do that, I also want to throw it over to my colleague, Melissa, who can introduce herself too.
Thanks, Sarah. So glad to be with you all tonight. Hopefully we've got some repeat visitors from our sessions in the past. You might have met me in the past there. My name is Melissa Rousseau, Director of Admissions, and I love working with my admissions team to help welcome new students into Calvin. We've got a great number of students coming here this fall, and so I'm here to help facilitate that transition for you from high school to college and just provide you the extra support that you might need as you move your student through to those next steps. So thank you for joining us tonight, and I will let Sarah take it from there, and then I'll close up from that point.
All right, thanks, Melissa. And thanks, I see that Stephanie is helping get the slideshow up and running. So I mentioned already, a lot of the work that we do in the Division of Student Life is really around fostering student learning, and often we refer to this as student development. What I want to do tonight is paint a picture for you of some of the adjustments that you can expect students, your students to encounter as they matriculate into Calvin. Now, this is not, I'm going to generalize a bit. So as I talk about different things, I just encourage you to be thinking through your individual students and their perspective, their personality, what you know to be true about them, and begin to think about how the information I share tonight could help you have conversation as you anticipate this transition. So my goal is really just to give you some helpful fodder that you can use in conversation, again, as you're anticipating what this might look like. So to begin, I wanted to chat through some common challenges for students who are adjusting to this new higher education environment. It probably doesn't surprise you that whenever an individual, ourselves included, find ourselves in a new circumstance, it's not atypical for us to feel disconnected. And in fact, that's a lot of what students do encounter when they come. Even if they know people who are coming to Calvin with them, we often hear from students that they do feel somewhat disconnected. And some of that has to do with the fact that the connections they are building in those early days and weeks are often very much at the surface level, and they yearn for deep connection. They yearn for that same sense of community and belonging that they experienced in previous settings. Maybe that's home, maybe that's school, maybe that's church. And those things take time. So it's not unusual for students to feel disconnected. Another thing that students struggle often with is this sense of developing new habits. For a lot of the students who come to Calvin, it will be their first time being responsible for things like time management and prioritization of tasks, even things like eating and sleeping well and healthy habits. It's not that they've never done those things. It's that for the first time, they don't have necessarily somebody looking over their shoulder, reminding them like, hey, your alarm went off 20 minutes ago. It's time to get out the door and go to class. And one of the things I want to reiterate is that this is incredibly common, right? One of the things we work so hard on with our first year students is helping them think about what are those habits they need to put in place? What are the ways that they need to care well for themselves so that they're in the best possible position to succeed? So I say, for a lot of them, it's the first time they don't have somebody holding their hand or walking them through that. But I also want to say in the next breath that we do have a ton of resources here at Calvin, and so much of our focus is on helping acclimate students to things like time management, prioritization, healthy living. So you're not throwing them completely out on their own, but in fact, it is something that they often have to navigate in more independent ways than they have in the past. A lot of our students come and experience a little bit of disillusionment or some challenge around academics. For a lot of students, they come into a college setting, and perhaps particularly high achievers, this might be the first time they get what they would consider a bad grade. So it is inevitable that every fall I'll end up having a conversation with a first year student who is devastated that they got a B+ on a test or an exam or a paper. And that is something that a lot of our high achieving students are trying to navigate. What happens when I'm no longer the smartest person in the room, or what happens when some of these classes are a little more challenging than I've experienced in the past, or even that maybe I expected I would encounter here. Similarly, there are often students who are navigating social and cultural diversity. And what I mean by that is that the community that they find themselves in at Calvin may be quite different than the communities from which they came. And that could take on a lot of different forms. It could be that it's not the same homogeneous community, meaning that there are lots of people from lots of different backgrounds, lots of places, race, ethnicity, gender, denomination. There's all kinds of different aspects and identities of diversity at Calvin. And for a lot of people, it may be their first time navigating, living in and amongst a really diverse community. And that can be something that is exciting, but it can also be something that takes some adjusting to. So, I liken it to the first year I got married. I came from a particular set of family and a way of doing holidays. And then all of a sudden I found myself as part of another family, which was a wonderful thing, but there were certainly differences that I was navigating. That's not unlike what it is to come to a community, to learn alongside, to live with a roommate, to be part of organizations and clubs where there's just a lot of diversity and difference. Again, it's a real value, but it certainly is something that warrants adjustment. We do have a lot of students that come to Calvin and they experience some challenge or some disillusionment because they are comparing themselves to others and they may get discouraged. And some of this is related to what I've already talked about, but a very common trend among first year students is that they experience what we call imposter syndrome. So all of a sudden they start to ask questions like, did Calvin make a mistake? Am I supposed to be here? Should I not have gone this far away from home? Maybe I don't belong. Maybe I don't have what it takes. Maybe I'm not enough to cut it. All of those are common questions that people ask. And often it's because they're looking at other people and wondering, why do they seem so well adjusted? Why do they seem like everything is coming easy to them? I think in some ways, this has only been magnified in recent years through social media because there's already kind of a comparison culture that emerges there. I want to normalize it and say it's not unusual. I also want to find ways to help your students stop the comparison game and instead try to find ways that they can relate to one another. Because the truth of the matter is that everybody at some point is concerned that they don't measure up, that they're not enough, that they're somehow not connected, or that they're more disconnected than their peers. And so part of what we're trying to do is foster community. And as family members, you can have that same conversation to try to normalize their own experience within this larger context. And then finally, there's a lot of people who are trying to navigate relationships, not just new relationships here at Calvin, but relationships from home. Sometimes that's family relationships and trying to figure out What is that new rhythm of connection? And how do the things that were so meaningful in terms of regular conversation and regular presence, what does that look like in a new season? So they're navigating all these things. And in the midst of all these challenges, it's not unusual for students to feel like Calvin isn't necessarily everything they dreamed it would be, that for the first time they start wondering, like, is this what I signed up for? And I kind of thought it would be different. In some ways, it's that transition from the ideal to the real, as students are navigating that. And you can go to the next slide, Stephanie. The biggest way that this manifests is in homesickness. Now, it's easy for us to think about homesickness as really missing home. And in fact, that's true, right? A lot of students do come, whether they are from 3 miles down the road here in Grand Rapids and they're living in the residence halls, or maybe they're from all the way across the world and they've traveled thousands and thousands of miles to be here. Regardless, there are aspects of kind of that tangible missing being at home that will emerge for many of our students. They'll miss family, they'll miss friends, they'll miss pets more than they imagined. They'll miss things like seeing a diversity of age. So we often, I'll hear from students when, let's say, a grandma walks on campus or a small child, they'll say, I'm so unused to seeing elderly or young people. I'm just used to kind of seeing either students or staff and faculty. All of those are aspects of homesickness that might emerge. But what may interest you is that for many of our students, it's not even the physical sense of being away from home that is the most disconcerting or that requires the most adjustment. Often it's the sense that Kelvin doesn't yet feel like another place to call home. So there's the sense that, okay, I'm in a transition, I'm doing the right things, but this doesn't yet feel like home to me. It doesn't yet feel like another place where I am fully myself, where I know who I am, I know what I'm about, I have a community of people that know me and see me and value me in the wholeness of who I am. So part of what we navigate in those early days is that students who feel homesickness, whether they miss the physical place or they're kind of navigating the emotions of not yet feeling at home in this place, is that there's a draw sometimes to want to return home, to want to return to that familiarity, or even to focusing so much on the desire to be home. And what happens is that when people are hyper focused on trying to go home or be home or return to that sense of ease at home, then they actually miss out on opportunities to create that familiarity here on campus. So we do spend time as a student life division with cross-campus colleagues thinking about how can we foster a sense of belonging? How do we foster a sense of home here? And one of the things that you can do as parents is try to lean into encouraging your students and your family members to think through, what does it look like to cultivate familiarity in a new place? How can you be supportive from afar, but not just encourage them to leave and come home as a way to kind of ease that transition? I was reading this week, and I thought this bared mentioning tonight. I was reading a recent scholarly study. So I spent a lot of time thinking about student development. How do we cultivate rich context for learning here at Calvin? And one of the recent studies that I read talked about the fact that moving away, and again, it doesn't matter the distance, the length, or the length of time, or the proximity away from home, but just the mere fact of moving out of what is home into a new environment, that actually has a positive impact on a student's development of metacognition. And you might say, meta what? What does that mean? So metacognition is actually thinking about thinking. So cognition is the way you think. Metacognition is thinking about thinking. So if a student is able to think about the ways they think and make sense of things, then they thrive. So part of what we do at Calvin is we think about, or we talk through, hey, how are you learning to solve problems on your own? How are you seeing yourself adjust in the midst of this difficult transition? What are you noticing about the ways that you're walking toward hard things or hard problems that need solving? What are you noticing about your own resilience? In other words, all of the ways that students begin to think about hard and painful things, how they walk toward challenges, how they learn to relate to others, all of them not only helps them be more successful in the collegiate learning environment, but it actually sets them up well for the rest of life. So I say all that to say, challenge is good. We talk a lot in student life about having equal balance of both challenge and support. And that's, in fact, I think a good takeaway as parents for all of us too, is to think through how do we challenge our students and support them, but not lean too far on either of those spectrums, because growth happens in the midst of that tension that we're holding. So I want to get tangible with you. What are the ways that you can support your students as you think about their transition to Calvin? First of all, before they leave home, and then often once they've left, remind them of their values and interests and goals. When I was teaching in the classroom in the collegiate environment, one of the first things I would do the first day of class is I would say to students, write down right now what you value about this opportunity to pursue an education, what you're most interested in pursuing, and what goals you have while you're here. And I want you to write it down in a place that's accessible, because I guarantee you that in a couple of weeks, in a couple of months, you're going to start to question all those things. And you're going to wonder if you made a mistake, and you're going to wonder if you have what it takes and if you're cut out for this. Well, as family members, as parents, I think that's one of the best things you could do before your students depart for Calvin in the fall, is I think you could have that conversation about why did you choose this path? Why did you sense a call to Calvin? What is that about? And then later, when you're navigating some of the transition with them, when they're already here, you're able to reflect back on that and speak truth to them about who they are, about what that sense of call was, and remind them of that, because that's no less relevant down the road than it is at this particular moment. And sometimes what we need is loved ones to remind us of that. The other thing you can do is really encourage them to create routines. And I'd also say encourage them to reach out to people who can help them create those routines. So you can encourage them to think about places on campus or in the community that remind them of home. So one of the things that I often talk about when I'm working with or chatting with a student who's feeling some homesickness is I'll say, is there somewhere you've been in the last 2 weeks that made you feel or reminded you of home, or that felt like something at home? And often that's a really helpful question that family members and parents can ask as well, because it reminds people that you can find bits and pieces of that all the while you're trying to create a new sense of familiarity here at Calvin and kind of craft a new sense of what feels like a home away from home. I encourage students to take study breaks with others. And again, this is not always an easy thing, particularly for students who maybe aren't the gregarious, outgoing types that want to walk up and down a hall in a residence hall and say, "Hey, who wants to go to Pete's Coffee today?" But what I often remind students is, if you can name what you're feeling, if you're feeling alone, if you're feeling left out, if you're feeling not good enough, I guarantee you there is somebody in close proximity who's experiencing that same thing. So I'll often tell people, how would you feel if somebody dropped by your room and said, "Hey, do you want to go grab dinner? Or do you want to go grab Pete's Coffee? Or you want to go take a quick walk because I need to clear my head?" And they often say, like, "I wish somebody would do that." And I turn it back on them and I say, well, what if you're that person? What if you challenge yourself to do that to the person down the hall from you, or the person that you have made eye contact with in your particular class? So I think, again, finding ways to encourage them to reach out to others. Never underestimate the power of eating well and sleeping well. So as a parent, I think, I say this as a parent of teens myself, there's a fine line between being overbearing and saying, like, "What did you eat today? And how much did you eat?" And just saying, as I think of my own kids, as they're struggling with something, I might say, like, "Hey, have you slept well this week? Do you think that could have anything to do with how you're feeling?" So again, encouraging them to eat well, to sleep well. We have over 75 clubs and organizations on campus. I'm transitioning to the next point. All of those are based on individual interest areas, and we really try to foster a sense of belonging and connection through those kinds of opportunities. They'll have opportunities to connect in the residence halls. They'll have opportunities to join clubs and organizations. They'll have opportunities to get connected in their disciplinary areas of study or focus that they're really interested in. Encourage them to do all of those things to join that. And sorry, Steph, I'm still on the last slide. If you could go back to that. The other thing I'd say is encourage them to make their living spaces comfortable. So what are the little things that they could do in their living spaces to both remind them of home, so something that feels like home, as well as to think about where they want to go. So I remember working with a student who said, all I can think about is that I want to be in the big city when I'm done, that I've always felt a call there. So I said, well, maybe one of the things that would make this feel more like home is to hang some pictures of the big city. And in fact, they started doing that. It became something really comforting. It became something that other people came in to see. They started to foster connection and community. So it's an example of ways to help people put their own mark on the rooms that they have and start to cultivate a space that feels like theirs, that's also inviting and can open them up to other connections. And then I put finally on here, ask your students to tell you about people that they've met that they imagine they could have a connection with. And the reason I phrase it like that is, I know just in talking with my own students, one of my own kids, my daughter was a freshman in high school this year. And I remember saying on the first day of school, she was kind of like, I don't really know anybody. I'm not really building connections. And I said, well, who are the people you've connected with? Well, the answer to that was nobody in her mind. She didn't feel like she was connected. But when I asked the question, who are the people that you imagine you could have a connection with based on the initial, contacts you've had, she had 5 or 6 different people that, well, there was this one girl and there was this guy in this class that I felt like we kind of had, we were talking about a really interesting thing. Those are the kinds of questions that open students up to possibilities and start to give them an imagination about what future connections could look like. So that, when I think about my family's now lived here in Grand Rapids, Michigan for 6 years, we moved from Southern California. And that very first year, even as a grown adult, even with a work community and all these things that I was walking toward and excited to be here, it takes time to develop community. And the communities that we come from don't happen overnight. So what are the ways we can constantly try to encourage students to lean in, to continue to explore and to pay attention to those things that spark imagination or spark hope? That's one of the best things that family members and parents can do. So finally, I want to say a little bit, Steph, you can go to the next slide, about returning home. So there's going to come a time when your student has been away from home and for the first time they come back. For commuter students, it may be, the first night, it may be the first weekend. For our students who are living on campus and further away from home, it may not be until one of our scheduled breaks. For some of our students who are studying far from home, it may not be for a year or even 4 years. But there will come a time when students come home and it's kind of the first time home. And you'll probably, as family members, parents, you'll probably start to notice some changes in your students. First and foremost, they'll likely have a new level of independence because they've been living away from home. And the structures and rules that you had when last they were living at home or when last they were home will feel pretty foreign to them now. What I encourage is that you have a conversation before that first visit. Communication is key. Now, it may be, in the midst of that first visit early on that you start to talk about things, but it's really important to clarify some of your expectations before conflict emerges. I'll often hear from family members, I underestimated how much we'd be, getting into little arguments about where they should be and when and what time and who they should hang out with and what kind of expectations we had as a family for the time they'd spend with us. I'd encourage you to explore those assumptions on the front end. Have an honest conversation about things like curfew, helping around the house, what your hopes and expectations are for them, how often you want them to come and go, who's going to pay for what. Because what we will find is that students, even if they've been living really independently on their own here at Calvin, sometimes they'll go home and they'll revert back to everything that was before they were at Calvin. And they'll assume that mom and dad are going to handle everything just as they did when they were in high school. And yet they'll also assume that it's okay for them to decide what time they're going to go to bed, decide what time they need to be home, decide who can come and go from their space. Those are all things that you're going to want to have conversations on the front end. And that'll, again, really help avoid conflict or at least help you navigate some of those changes. The other thing that I point out is that the shift from a child to visitor starts to occur as soon as somebody leaves home. And often that change is more significant than folks anticipate. And it sometimes happens without anyone realizing it. And so I think to talk about that dynamic, what does that mean for siblings? So all of a sudden, a student comes home and they don't spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with the family in quite the same ways that they did. Or there may be aspects of their eating habits or sleeping habits or socialization habits that have changed as they've been away from home. And I often hear from families that sometimes that's hardest on the siblings because they kind of have this moment in time of like they left at this stage and they're going to come back and everything will just pick up just like it was. So some of what you're navigating is not just how to have those conversations with your students, but with other members of the household, and some of what that transition will look like. So those are a few tips and tricks just to get you thinking about conversations you might want to have even now as you anticipate that transition for your student. And what I'd encourage is that you surround yourself with people who have walked this road ahead of you. That may be those of us at Calvin who really want to partner with you when you're worried about your student. We want to talk with you and figure out together how we can best support them. But it will also likely be other parents and other family who have navigated a similar road. And in fact, tonight you're going to have a chance to hear from some of our current Calvin parents that are affiliated with the Parent Council, and they'll be able to talk a little bit about some of what they've navigated with their students as well. So again, this is an anticipatory, a little bit more philosophical, what does adjustment look like? And now Melissa's going to tell you about some really technical things that have to do with helping your students officially take those next steps as they prepare to join us this fall.
Thank you, Sarah. I found myself both inspired by what Sarah was talking about, and also maybe you're feeling a little bit unsettled just knowing how much change is ahead. And I hope that you know that you have our full support and your students have full support at Calvin as well as they transition over. So while it might be a rocky road, it's something that we can all navigate together. We're here for you. I wanted to walk you through these final steps that happen this summer before we move into Q&A. If you are, though, finding, just a quick note, if you are finding that you have some questions that you'd like to start typing in, you are welcome to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to start sharing those messages, and we'll be answering them either live or in written format here real soon. So things that you should be looking forward to and accomplishing with your student this summer. For those of you that are ready to head here this fall, a couple of you might be incoming seniors here this next year. But the first step is to make sure that you've declared, or your student has declared, academic interest. What is the program that they're planning to study? Some students might still be feeling a little bit undecided, and that is okay. Calvin's got a great setup in terms of helping students navigate the choices that they have around careers. If you haven't been able to help connect them with resources around that yet, we have recordings that we've done earlier this year around career explorations and some of the career services help that we do, along with our life work program. We have a lot of options to help students define their majors. Our faculty are a huge help for that as well. So if you find that you'd like to connect with faculty, your son or daughter would like to do that, that is definitely something that we can help you out with setting up as well. But students should be responding to an academic interest questionnaire that was emailed to them, as well as in their student status portal, to say what their major is. It's a time to declare that. Many students might change that as they go and as they learn and experience the learning that they'll do. But it's a good place to kind of set your sail towards at least one direction. So that's one of the big steps. Second one there is the events that happen this summer. So we have our first big one, which is orientation, which some of you may have already experienced. We've had a couple of orientation sessions on campus, and we have a couple more coming up still here in June, as well as some online options for orientation as well. But every new incoming student should do an orientation. That is a great way to onboard to Calvin, to really get familiar with resources, to meet some new friends, really to just feel ready and equipped to do what it is that you need to do to begin the first semester. That will lead to advising. We're doing faculty advising with students. They'll meet one-on-one in a virtual setting with our faculty, and that will help them really with getting guidance on this first year of classes. They can talk through some of those long-term plans of maybe what types of internships they might look forward to, or what types of classes they'll have later on. Maybe even some guidance around how their majors or their focuses will fit in with their larger program. So faculty advising is a really key moment to connect, to get some guidance, and then that really leads to getting registered in the specific classes that students will take at their first year. From advising with their faculty, then we're looking at move-in. And move-in is that great experience that students will have at the end of August. Some of you will have different dates, so watch very carefully the Calvin messages that come out, because that'll have your dates in it. Usually it's around the 22nd, 23rd, 29th of August. We're in that range of time. But get ready for move-in. That's a great moment where you can start practicing some of these skills that Sarah just talked about helping those students really start to experience their independence and start to nest into their new homes here at Calvin. We'll be here to help support and move them in and carry some boxes with you too. Finally, my last step is to connect. There are definitely a lot of questions that you have this summer as you help your student move through this final steps. And so we have options to connect with our staff in many different ways. The admissions staff can continue to be a resource for you to perhaps find the right resource. Sometimes you aren't even sure who to ask the question that you have to. Start with my admissions team. They're here to serve you throughout the summer. You can message us or give us a call or send us a text, whatever way you want to contact us, we're here to help. Also, we have some options if your student would like to ask some questions of a current student. We have a student chat option available, which is on our visit page. So calvin.edu/visit is a great way to set one of those meetings up. And we will definitely get you in touch with anybody that can help. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. Final reminder that's not on my slide here. If your student's not yet used to using their Calvin login credentials, it should be their username and password specific Calvin. Make sure they're starting to practice that and getting used to it, because messaging will start to come through their Calvin email as well as watch personal email too. But that's a great way to communicate, and just keep your eye on messages as the summer goes. You can flip to my next one, and this is my closing here to hand it back to Richie. We are here to support you, as I've said maybe 10 times already. I tell you any one thing that you remember, it's that we're here to support you. We want to help your student transition successfully. No question is the wrong question. We will answer anything and guide you along. So please reach out to my team, to me, and we're here to support you. With that, handing it off to Richie to move us to our parent Q&A session.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Melissa and Sarah, for your time. I learned a lot. So that must mean it was a very good opportunity for everybody. So I already see a lot of questions rolling in, which is awesome. We are going to pass the torch over to members of the Parent Council here at Calvin, and we will have opportunity for questions and answers. First, I would like Kalyan to introduce himself, and then we have another parent joining shortly. So we'll stop for that interjection. But if you could provide name, just a quick bio, and then one tip or piece of advice that you would recommend for parents who are sending kids off to college.
Thanks, Richie. I think firstly, congratulations to the parents for making such a fantastic decision to get your child into Calvin. I'll give you a quick brief about myself. I moved into the US about 10 years back from India. And when we came here, everything was so strange. The system of education was so new to us. And when it came time for my son to get to college, he applied in 10 different schools and he got accepted in 9, and as close as UCI and everything. But after we visited Calvin, we were absolutely convinced that Calvin is the place for us. And not only for us as parents, for even our son. So my son will become a senior now. His name is Rehan. He's doing his pre-med, and he loves the place. And he says, Dad, I wish that they had another 4 years where I can do my higher studies in Calvin. So one piece of advice that I would give is what many people gave me is, look at them as young adults and learn to let go, but let them know that you have their back always. because what we realized as parents in the last 3 years of him being in Calvin, that our son has moved from a very dependent child to become a very dependable child. And that's what Calvin has got in store, because great resources, fantastic faculty, and they're always there willing to help. And my son now calls our home here in Southern California as his second home, and Calvin his first home. So once again, congratulations and all the very best.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. And we will get into questions in a second, but I do want to give Tracy an opportunity for introductions as well. So we're asking if you could provide your name and quick bio, just a little bit about yourself. And then lastly, one piece of advice or tip that you would offer for parents.
Absolutely. Hello, Calvin parents and prospective families and students. My name is Tracy Brooks. I am from Detroit, Michigan, and a proud Calvin parent of Taryn, who is going into her sophomore year, and alumni Wesley, who graduated last May, but actually just had their actual ceremony a few weeks ago. Totally agreeing with what Calvin shared. I would definitely say Calvin is a place of growth. I have definitely seen growth, not just emotional growth in my children, but also spiritual growth and development. And that is the thing that I was most excited to see, that as a parent who was committed to raising children in a Christian household, Calvin was a campus where they could continue that growth and that development. They've been free to ask questions. The professors that they have had on campus have been very engaging. The staff at Calvin, very responsive to students' needs. Anything that my students have needed in the way of resources, whether it was, the clinic if they weren't feeling well, the Bruni Center if they were having issues dealing with something, especially during the pandemic. That was a fantastic resource for them to have. Even just in the dining hall, how my daughter was saying there was a particular meal that she liked as a favorite and they didn't have it. She asked about it, and within, I want to say, a couple days, it was there in the dining hall. So she was really excited about that. So that is definitely what I would share with regard to our experience at Calvin.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both for great introductions. So now we're entering the questions and answers part of the night. So we want to start off with the question, could you describe what move-in day looked like for you? And for instance, how long were you around for on that day? And did you make store runs? Could you paint a picture of what that day is like?
So for me, with both move-in days, I would say Calvin does an excellent job of making that a very seamless and smooth operation. When we arrived on campus, there was plenty of signage out letting us know where to go, find the dorms that my children were in. There was assistance outside. There were carts and folks available to help us with that, help us with the checking in process, finding the rooms, meeting the roommates. So that was a very seamless process. As far as any additional items we needed to purchase, of course, that's always the case, whether it's toothpaste or pillowcase or something. The fantastic thing about the university is it's very centrally located to 28. So we were able to go to Bed Bath & Beyond. We were able to go to Target or Costco or wherever we needed to go. Everything is there pretty close by and along that strip or along the belt line. So that was definitely emotional. But again, Calvin made it a very seamless and manageable process.
Yeah, I would echo what Tracy said. When we moved in and we took our son there, we were made to feel like celebrities. We didn't have to carry even a single bag. And, you had students, coming in and, welcoming them, taking their stuff, putting that in their room. And we remembered suddenly there was something that was missing that we needed to have. And one of the students said, "Don't worry about it. I have a spare one. I can lend that to you, or I can take you, to one of the stores close by and we'll pick it up today itself." And they made it happen. So I think it's a very seamless and a very, how to say, a process that you will always cherish and remember.
Wonderful, thank you. I know move-in day can be pretty chaotic for a lot of students and families, but you put it very poetically, and it sounds like something that hopefully the parents here in the audience can look forward to. I do want to take one quick second to hand it back to Sarah to answer some of the questions that we've received, just in the questions and answers. So Sarah, could you tackle those?
Sure, there are several in here. So some of them are logistical, and what I can't answer, either we'll find an answer for you or I'll hand it off to some colleagues. I know people are wondering about vaccination requirements, and let me answer that more broadly. There are vaccination requirements for Calvin, but I think a lot of people are worried about the COVID vaccine in particular. Calvin will not be requiring the COVID vaccine, though we are strongly encouraging it, and we're doing everything we can to make that really accessible. So as of this past spring, we already had 65% of our students who were fully vaccinated. And we, obviously we'll lose the senior class, we'll welcome a new class to come in. We do have vaccine available through our health services. So if that is something that your student is interested, that's something we'll be able to accommodate when they get here. There will likely be some students for whom the vaccine will be required, in particular students who are traveling abroad. Some programs, some countries require that. As well as we anticipate that some athletes, there'll probably likely be some additional requirements for their participation. When I say additional requirements, I mean regular testing and that kind of thing. If students are fully vaccinated, then they automatically opt out of some of those additional requirements. So again, we are not requiring it for all students, but we are strongly encouraging it, and we're doing everything we can to make that more accessible. I think that probably answers the vaccine question. Richie, what other questions do you see that I might be able to help answer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm seeing one, you clicked, or someone clicked Sarah Visser would like to answer this question live. So I hope that is an indicator that you know the answer.
Okay.
But one is, are there any dorms specific to athletes?
Okay, good. Yeah, that was one I can answer.
Perfect.
So we don't have housing that is purely athletic housing, but we do tend to try to find ways to group different students with different affinities and interests together. So it's not unusual for there to be several athletes on a floor, but we don't have one floor that is all athletes and then kind of a lone person who's not a student athlete. So we do often put student athletes in every single residence hall. And we try to mix that up so that there's a lot of intersection from all different types of interests. But it is not at all unusual for athletes to be roomed together or to be in close proximity to one another. So you can take that, if you have an athlete, they will not be alone, but they will also be surrounded with people other than athletes, because we think that's important too.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I do see a couple of quick questions that I could answer. So students will be reached out to by their advisors, we're hoping by the end of this month. And that will also be an opportunity for students to plan out their courses. So the advisors will be faculty at Calvin. So that will take place this month. Faculty are reaching out to students individually for that. And another question, so I could touch on student employment a little bit, but maybe could the parents talk about whether or not their students were involved with jobs and what that looked like?
Yeah, I'll touch base on that. Each of the semesters for the first 2 years, my son did various things. So I think the first year he was in the admissions office, making telephone calls to prospective students and parents. And I think the next semester he was banquets. So that was a great experience and the next couple of semesters he was in the Western Michigan Research Lab, working with the team there. So great opportunities and a wonderful, platform for them to understand what work-life balance is all about.
Great, thank you. And Tracy, I don't know if you heard the question and want to say something on it, comment, but it was if you could comment on the employment of one of your students at Calvin and what that sort of process of finding a job while at Calvin looked like.
Yeah, so Wesley actually worked with Sarah Visser's office, and he provided data and a lot of culling through research and numbers. Admissions was one of those things as far as tracking, where students were coming from across the country and those sorts of things. But as a result of that job, discovered that he really liked that more so than the engineering major that he was interested initially in pursuing, and decided to switch his major to data science and business. So he is now working and living in the Grand Rapids area, working for a company called Service Express. He really enjoyed his time at Calvin. It was very impactful for him. And he literally fell in love with the Grand Rapids area and decided to stay there and make that his home. So, of course, my heart is a little sad. I would love to have him closer, but he's only a couple of hours away. And the great piece about that is that he's also there as a support for his sister as she makes her journey through Calvin. She currently is undecided, but again, as Callian said, all of the resources that are available on Calvin, from helping students with their resumes, putting their resumes together, helping to connect them with companies that would be a good match for their skill set. All of those resources were available to Wesley, and it definitely helped make his job search and his transition into the work life a lot easier and smoother.
Great, thank you both. And I want to preface this next question by saying there's no shame if the answer is no. But did you ever send care packages to your students while they were at Calvin? And how did that process look?
The answer is no. We actually never sent anything because one of the remarks that we always heard from our son is, Dad, I have everything here. And there were a couple of years, during Thanksgiving, we wanted to do something. And he said there was one student with whom he went to their house, spent about 3 days with their parents. And he said it was just like being at home. And so we didn't send anything, but because Calvin did provide everything, to be honest, he needed everything that he actually needed. And the only thing that we sometimes sent was some books that he would want, which was left behind here, and then we used to ship it across.
I also did not have to send anything to Wesley. However, that does not include sending him money or his sister money via Cash App or Zelle to go and get, maybe some smaller items that they wanted to get, or occasionally treat themselves and friends to, maybe eat out on a Friday or something like that. But for the most part, as far as, mailing actual care packages, I didn't. They had everything that they needed, and they were able to access the things that they needed. So I didn't worry about that. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Can I say something, Richie?
Yes, absolutely.
So there are actually some mechanisms set up. So if you wanted to send your child a care package, there's actually a way you can do that through Calvin. So there'll be information shared through parent newsletters. And, from time to time, parents will reach out and say, like, it's my student's birthday. Is there a way that I could send them a care package? Or it's finals week. Is there something I can do? You can do that on your own, and kind of put that together and send it through the typical mail or delivery. But there are also ways that at various points throughout the year that Calvin offices will help coordinate some of that. And I think you also find there's a parent Facebook page that's very active, and often a parent will throw out a question like, does anybody have a good cookie or cupcake recommendation? And lots of parents will say, oh, I sent my student this or that. So lots of opportunities for those who want to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. And I think you might be able to answer the next question. And I don't want to paraphrase. I want to say it exactly the way it's spelled out because I think it is phrased so awesomely. So Sarah, are there things parents should plan to remain on campus for after move-in, or do we simply dump them and run?
I love that dump and run. So there are actually some events planned for move-in day. And even this week, we've been emailing about specific times. So I'm not going to say anything about timing yet, except to say that in the next month or so, there'll be more communication that'll clarify particular times. But something really special that happens on move-in day, in addition to you dropping your student off and hopefully kind of getting them settled in the ways that they need to be, we have something called opening convocation. And the way we think about that is it's a ceremony that is quite comparable to graduation ceremony on the flip end, or on the, kind of the end of their Calvin experience. Opening convocation is the formal way that we welcome students to their studies at Calvin. All the faculty participate. Similar to graduation, faculty are in full regalia, so it's kind of a pomp and circumstance kind of thing. There's a charge to the incoming class, and there's an opportunity for them to receive something from Calvin and to sign in their names and kind of the history books of Calvin as new students. So a lot of parents and family members report that this is a moving kind of ceremony. It's a front bookend to a Calvin experience. And it's always something that we look forward to with great anticipation. So I'd encourage you, as you're thinking about your travel plans, if there's a way that you can stick around to enjoy that on that move-in day, I think it's one of those things that'll be meaningful to you and your student, hopefully.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And I think this next question might be for everyone, but we will start with the parents. So for medications and other health needs, how did your students go about getting those, meeting those needs while on campus?
So before my son left from home, he took the basic medication that one would actually need. And if he didn't find any of those, it was always available in the bookstore. And, by God's grace, there was no prescriptive medicines that he ever did need. So it was all available. The bookstore has got most of the basic stuff that a student would require.
Excellent. Tracy, is there anything that you would like to add to that? Concerning
technical.
No worries.
No, Wesley, no. Never had a situation where either of my children needed anything that they weren't able to access. Everything was pretty routine. So yeah, no challenges or no concerns there.
Richie, I could say a little bit more about the health center. So Calvin has a unique health center in that it's a fully fledged primary care physician office. So actually, a lot of our students end up naming Dr. Laura Champion, who's our MD, as their primary care physician while they're enrolled at Calvin. The office does all the things a normal office would do. They can do lab work, they can order tests. She has admitting privileges at the local hospitals, so we're part of those networks. And they also prescribe medication. I did see a question in the chat that was asking about, if I have to do regular check-ins for scripts or something like that, is that possible? Yes, in fact, it is. It's very common. Everything from allergy shots to ADD medication. We actually have psychiatrists who are part of our medical team. So we have an MD, we have several PAs and nurse practitioners. We have a couple of other rotating doctors, psychiatrists who come in, a dietitian. So really there's not much that Calvin can't do here on site. And if in fact additional medical specialties are needed, we have networks here that we accommodate that. So it's not unusual for students, particularly, I think sometimes parents are surprised to learn that their students can be prescribed ADD medication or other medications that come from a psychiatrist. They can be prescribed those right here on campus, and those regular monthly or quarterly checkups around meds. That's very common here at Calvin. It's something that Health Services is happy to accommodate.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. And I will turn it over to Melissa for a quick second about some of the questions regarding tuition payments. So could you tell us a little bit about what that looks like and when the initial tuition payment is due?
Well, what I can share with you around that is that there is an email going out. I see that our communication team has that planned for this week. And so there will be messaging about the information that you need to understand your student's bill, to understand how to pay that, what options you have, the ways to access the award package. All of that information is going out this week. And so when you get that and you have a chance to go into the student's login area in order to see all of that, definitely reach out to us with questions, but you will get access to that and have that information sent this week to everybody. So please reach out to your admissions counselor or to financial services or financial aid if you have questions.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. And I also am seeing some questions about move-in day. And I do just want to clarify. So move-in day is going to be August 25th, and that is set in stone. That is move-in day. And then that following few days is what we call welcome week. And then shortly thereafter is the first day of classes. So there is a bit of a buffer between the actual move-in and classes, which I know everyone is very grateful for.
Right. Richie, a correction or an addition to that is if students are involved in special programs like wilderness orientation, international orientation, impact, they have slightly different dates. And so just students should be watching their communication if they have involvement with one of those special programs, because they might move in a couple of days early.
Absolutely. Thank you for that clarification, Melissa. And unfortunately, I do believe we are out of time. It's 7:59, but I do want to say thank you, a huge thank you to the parents, members of the Parent Council who joined us today. Thank you for offering your time and answering the questions with such clarity and such grace tonight. We are very grateful for that. We do wish that we could get to every question, but all of y'all in the audience today had such great questions. We couldn't get to all of them, but hopefully we did answer a big number of them.
And we do keep record of the questions, and so we'll reach out to you if we have your contact information in order to answer them as best as we can in writing too. So
yes, thank you, Melissa.
Everyone.
Appreciate it. So that's all we have prepared for the night. Again, thank you to everyone who attended today, and take care.
Thanks, everyone. Look forward to seeing you.